Somewhere beneath this Virginia valley, the old stories say, lies more than $1 million in buried gold. This marker on Route 19 is where the story begins. Saltville, Virginia, the salt capital of the Confederacy. In the winter of 1864, men dug a hole in a frozen road at midnight and buried everything they owned. This is the story of Saltville, Virginia, and the lost treasure of Abraham Smith. History here shades quickly into legend. The old stories of Smythe County tell of a prosperous landowner named Abraham Smith. The details shift depending on who's telling it. Treasure stories always do, but the bones are the same in every version. Smith had good land in the valley, grown sons to work it, and a lifetime of profits kept the old-fashioned way. In hard coin, $46,000 in gold and silver, says one version of the tale. $60,000 in gold, says another. Take your pick. In today's money, either number is comfortably north of $1 million. And in the autumn of 1864, with Union cavalry massing beyond the mountains, Abraham Smith faced the question every man of property in the path of a war has faced since wars began. What do you do with everything you own when you cannot carry it and cannot defend it? By December of 1864, the war was closing in, and every soul in the valley knew the Federal Army was coming. The legend says Smith made his decision. One bitter night, he and his sons loaded the family fortune, coin packed in kegs, or in an iron salt kettle, depending on the telling, hitched the quietest team they owned, and slipped out into the dark without a word to anyone. One version of the legend says they buried it beneath a roadbed outside town, the one place no treasure hunter thinks to look, where 1,000 wagon wheels would roll over it and pack the earth down harder every year. The other version climbs into Poor Valley, between Allison's Gap and the town, where an abandoned saltpeter working ran back into the hillside. Into that darkness, the story goes, went $60,000 in gold, and the hillside swallowed it whole. By morning, the earth held everything the Smiths owned. No map, no marker, nothing written down, only the memory of the men who had dug the hole, which, as it turned out, was the least safe place of all to keep it. To understand why an army was marching on one small Virginia town, you have to understand what was boiling in its kettles. Long before there was a town, there was the salt. An ancient ocean lies trapped in the rock beneath this valley, and for hundreds of thousands of years, the ground itself has leaked brine. Mammoths and mastodons lumbered out of the hills to lick the salty earth, and their bones are still being pulled from the mud today. Scientists know Saltville as one of the great Ice Age dig sites in North America. The marker calls it paleontology. The locals just call it the salt. The first settlers came over the mountains in the 1700s, and they did what every living creature in this valley had done for 100 centuries before them. They came for the salt. They sank wells into the valley floor, hauled up brine by the barrel, and boiled it down in great iron kettles. Every kettle of steam left behind a crust of white gold, and by the early 1800s, wagon trains were hauling Saltville salt across the mountains in every direction. Then in the spring of 1861, the country tore itself in two, and almost overnight this quiet valley became one of the most strategically important places in the entire Confederate South. Because in the 19th century, there was only one reliable way to keep meat from rotting: salt. No salt meant no cured pork, no army rations, no winter stores for the family farm. Salt wasn't seasoning, salt was survival. The Union Navy blockaded southern ports and choked off imported salt. Coastal salt works were shelled and burned. One by one, the Confederacy's sources dried up, until the fate of the southern food supply ran, to a remarkable degree, through a single valley in southwest Virginia. At its peak, Saltville boiled out millions of bushels, by some accounts as much as 2/3 of all the salt the Confederacy used. Hundreds of kettles bubbled day and night, and the smoke over the valley never stopped. The town swelled with workers, teamsters, and state agents. Southern governors fought each other for contracts and guarded their kettle allotments like treaties. They called it King Salt, and everyone on both sides of the war understood exactly what that crown was worth, which meant everyone also understood the arithmetic. If the Union could destroy Saltville, the Confederate larder would begin to starve. By 1864, federal commanders in Kentucky and Tennessee were drawing up plans to do exactly that. In October of 1864, the first blow came riding out of Kentucky. General Stephen Burbridge, 5,000 men, and orders to burn the salt works to the ground. Against him stood barely 2,800 Confederates, reserves, home guards, old men and boys among them, dug in on the bluffs above the ford of the Holston River. All day the artillery dueled across the ridges, and attack after attack broke against those bluffs. By nightfall, Burbridge's ammunition was gone, and his army was gone with it, back over the mountains. Against all odds, the salt works had held, but what followed stained that victory forever. In the days after the battle, Confederate soldiers murdered dozens of wounded black troopers of the 5th United States Colored Cavalry where they lay. History remembers it as the Saltville Massacre. This valley's story carries that weight too, and it should be said plainly. 2 weeks before Christmas, General George Stoneman came down out of Tennessee with thousands of veteran Union cavalry, cutting the railroad and brushing aside everything the Confederacy could throw in his path. On December 20th, 1864, his troopers overwhelmed the 500 defenders left holding Saltville. This time there was no miracle at the ford. The town and its kettles belonged to the Union by nightfall. For a full day, Stoneman's men wrecked what 60 years had built, smashing the great kettles, burning the sheds, choking the wells. And the smoke that had hung over this valley for 3 generations stopped. The works would limp back to life by March, but by then, the Confederacy they fed had only weeks left to live. The war was ending, and the world Abraham Smith had buried his gold to protect was already gone. And here is where the legend turns to mystery, because as far as anyone knows, Abraham Smith and his sons never dug it back up. Why not? The stories don't agree on that either. Some say the war scattered and buried the only men who knew the spot. Some say the family fled the ruined valley and simply never came home. And some say they came back and couldn't find it, that fences fell, roads moved, and the earth kept the secret they'd trusted it with. For 160 years, treasure hunters have walked the roadbeds and probed the old mine openings of Poor Valley. No coins have ever surfaced. No bank record, no deathbed confession, no lucky farmer's plow. The Smith fortune has never, officially, been found. And the legend refuses to die. When the old railroad bed out of Saltville was pulled up to build a rail trail toward Glade Spring, treasure hunters took notice. 13 miles of freshly turned earth along a route the Smiths would have known well. Maybe it was found generations ago, in secret, by someone smart enough to stay quiet. Maybe there never was an Abraham Smith, or maybe it is still down there tonight, under a road you can drive, in a hillside you can hike. Today, Saltville is a town of about 2,000 people. The company works that rose after the war shut down half a century ago and took 900 jobs with them. But here's the remarkable thing. The salt never quit. A modern plant still pulls brine from beneath the valley and ships salt across the country. Food salt, pool salt, the newest chapter of an industry that is older than the town, older than the nation, older than the mammoth's bones in the museum up the street. The old well fields are a park now, and the Museum of the Middle Appalachians keeps the Ice Age bones and the battle relics side by side, deep time and wartime, one small building, one long story of salt. And out on Route 19, the marker still stands. Salt capital of the Confederacy, 2 battles, millions of bushels, the certain history, cast in metal, for anyone who slows down long enough to read it. What the marker doesn't mention is Abraham Smith. Legends don't make the official signs. That's what makes them legends. But stand there a while with the valley spread out in front of you and see if you don't start wondering exactly where you would have buried it. Some stories are written on metal signs by the highway, and some are still buried, somewhere between Allison's Gap and the Salt. Thank you for watching Historical Marker Stories. Please like and subscribe for more great content.